Hey guys, welcome back to Gossip Without Prejudice. Today we bring something a little bit different. So in the face of the federal government's increasing encroachment on local politics, I wanted to bring in some local people. Right here in Seattle, we've had a lot of anti-ICE, anti-immigration enforcement protests, for better or for worse. Seattle police, and hopefully not, the federal government has not gotten directly involved, but ICE agents are on our streets. So I wanted to bring in some local activists, artists, and personalities to talk a little bit more about what that has done to our community and or their perception on life. Today, we're talking to Chappin. Chappin was fucking awesome to sit down with. We had a great conversation. We talked about politics, art, community, social media in the attention economy, a topic that has come up before. And now I got to hear all about what his thoughts are on the current state of affairs. It was amazing. Chappin can be found on Substack, TikTok. We'll put all of that in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening, guys. We'll get to our conversation now. Chappin, thanks so much for coming into the studio today. I really appreciate your time. I've been a long-time follower of yours on social media. What caught my attention was your profiling of the Seattle City Council, and that seems such a great place to start, especially with national and local politics sort of bleeding together in the news cycle these last couple of weeks. Tell us a little bit about your creative ethos and why you think that blew up, or why you really appreciated the opportunity to talk about the Seattle City Council so directly.
Yeah, of course, John. Thank you for having me onto the podcast. This is my first podcast I've ever recorded, so this should be fun. I got started on TikTok very randomly. One of my friends was like, she's a bigger content creator in the area, and I would see her doing her TikToks all the time. And then the TikTok ban a few months ago, which was about to happen, like the eve of it, I remember just being like, okay, fuck it, I don't care. Let me just post whatever I want to post about. And at that point, it was just me giving my hot takes about Seattle, things that have been frustrating me about Seattle for a while now. Yeah. I think one of them that gained a lot of traction was when I was talking about people recording the Unhoused on 3rd and Pike and 12th and Jackson, where I was just like, what the fuck is wrong with you for doing that? It's very dehumanizing people. And I had a lot of feelings. I'm passionate about everyone having dignity and finding the humanity in everybody.
And you draw attention to something that is very refreshing in your content, is that a lot of people, at least in my experience, have really doom and gloom on Seattle for, in my opinion, no reason. Like, you know, the food's not good, the fashion is terrible, there's nothing to do. And this is one of the largest cities on the West Coast. Yeah. Tell us, why is Seattle special to you, and why did you build, at least partly, a platform talking about how great Seattle is when we're so pessimistic all the time?
Seattle is so great for me because I have been to other cities in the United States and then also other cities in at least North America. And Seattle is high on the list of progressive politics, clean air, clean water, a bustling economy, where I moved here 8 years ago and was able to get a job instantly.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Seattle is this place that in the popular zeitgeist is so unknown, where people just know Space Needle, Pike Place, Boeing, maybe Starbucks, but they don't know about the true Seattle. Even people that live here don't know about the true Seattle. There's these disparate perceptions of what Seattle is. And I wanted to give my perspective of someone that is all over the city. I'm not just restrained to Capitol Hill or downtown. I'm going all the way up to, Wedgwood, or all the way down to Skyway, Rainier Beach. Yeah. And I'm seeing what is actually happening in Seattle, where Seattle is a metropolitan city, like you just mentioned, population of 700,000 people. It is the brain trust, along with San Francisco, of the United States.
Yes.
Seattle is a very, very important city in the grand scheme of it all. So I wanted to paint Seattle in its actual colors of what Seattle is, not this very limited perspective of it, of just oh, Seattle sucks.
You talk about perspective, and I think that's a great call out, because our society, I was just talking with our executive producer about this earlier this week, but in my opinion, our society has become so visual, what's directly in front of you or on your feed, or the media you consume drives your perception.
Yes.
Right. And why do you think that perception has been so prevalent for so long? I maybe might even point out before social media has arisen, but certainly now that TikTok is how most people our age get their news.
This is something I've been thinking about for a while, just because there is this cultural, I've been calling it the cultural doom loop, where
Mhm.
everything is just the same, where you go on TikTok and it's the same exact, come along with me to see this. Your perfect 48 hours in this. And it doesn't leave any room for individual thought or movement or whatever about the place that you are living in. It's just being followed and led. And that creates a perception of Seattle that is only filtered through a very specific lens of aesthetics and what is trendy. You're not going to see Discovery Park in TikToks, or you're not going to see like going to Seward Park and just laying out, which is like a very quintessential Seattle experience, because that's not aesthetically pleasing and it's not going to get you clicks, likes, and views. That is just this loop that we are in, where culture is very stagnant and
How
it
do
leads
we
to Seattle being flattened.
how do we break that loop, right? I mean, we're all pretty aware of it. At least I hope the audience is. But what do you think Seattle or that doom loop needs to either improve itself or break it entirely?
People need to go offline and touch grass. Essentially, everything cannot be about onlineness. Everything cannot be filtered, remix, whatever, to fit appropriately in a 30-second TikTok to express a city. How are you going to express all of what Seattle is through like maximum? I think you can do 10 minutes on TikTok right now,
Yeah.
but even that is just flattening the city. So people need to, one, stop being, I hate to say it, no, because I'm reading a Wild Sheep Chase by Murakami right now. So
Okay.
people need to stop being sheep a little bit and following the trends of, oh, I'm just going to have someone literally lead me through my visit to Seattle, or as a person that lives in Seattle, just like, oh, let me go on TikTok and see what the top 10 things to do are.
And
I can't do that anymore.
What do you wish you could talk about more? Because you touch base, like the algorithm, TikTok can technically take up to 10 minutes, exactly correct. But I've found that videos over about 3 minutes, or at least, and maybe I'm not a skilled enough content creator, but like videos over about 3 minutes, no matter how engaging, really require a highly engaged audience to get traction. So like that technical reality is there, but how do you think that actually plays out? You know?
I looked at the stats on TikTok viewership, and most people check out within like the first 20 to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So you got to front load whatever message that you're trying to get out. But it's a hard one of trying to get people to engage. And the one thing that I wish that I could talk about to answer your question right now is platform capitalism. Just because I experienced it yesterday, where I grabbed a scooter at Cal Anderson, and the scooter would not work. Like I kicked off to go, and and it did not function at all, which was confusing to me because, you know, normally scooters function properly when I use them. And then I look at the app, and the entirety of Cal Anderson was blocked off as like a no park zone, or a zone where you cannot enter it with a Lime scooter or bike or glide or whatever.
Is that around when the rally started?
It was literally yesterday,
Yeah.
Which is very weird to think about. Uber as a non-governmental agency, is just like a private company that's just like started off of vibes.
Yes.
Is now able to dictate city level policy, city level actions,
and the physical movement of the citizens.
And where none of these people are elected officials. And that is crazy to think about.
And for a bit of context, for those of you not in Seattle, there was a anti-ICE, anti-immigration brutalization rally that started in Cal Anderson Park, which is not far from our studio. Yesterday evening, they marched from a variety of places through downtown, and that in the days previously, there was also several confrontations at the Seattle Federal Building, and Lime and Uber bikes, other e-bike companies, were piled in front of the garage to prevent alleged ICE agents from leaving. And there's also a similar no-go zone around the Federal Building that remains in Lime scooters. Sorry, I just wanted to catch everyone up there for those not familiar.
Context is king. Context is king.
Yes, exactly. And I think platform capitalism, so many different private institutions are now supplanting public ones that used to serve at least my parents and our grandparents. Like public transportation, how Uber every 2 to 5 years keeps reinventing buses. Like, you know, they're like, hey, what if we just have Ubers, but they go on specific routes and have specific stops? And I'm like, dipshits. We already have that.
Already
That's
did that.
it's a bus. And you don't even, and we have public employees that are usually paid better than Uber drivers and proper infrastructure to maintain it. And yet the Seattle City Council either elects, Dow Constantine to the Sound Transit Board and pays him $500,000 a year to manage a ridership population smaller than that of many other cities whose transportation authorities get paid less. How do you think we make that case to the public that like these institutions already exist and they can serve us again?
Once again, it's about touching grass. It's about realizing that we are giving a lot of control to tech companies with their products that served a purpose. I remember when Uber came out, I was like, great, I can not wait. I'm from Maryland, so don't have to wait on the yellow taxi anymore. I can just like go on my phone and order an app. But that over the years has now led to, Uber created like this gig economy that is the foundation for work in the later half of the 2020s or whatever, 2010s, 2020s, which is wild to think. And it's very hard for people to think at a systems level, which is what I've been doing with my TikToks and then also with my writing on Substack right now, where I'm not focusing on individuals. That's just like symptoms. Those are trees. I want to focus always on the forest. In this case, it is the larger system of companies like Uber, Google, etc., becoming outsized, so much so that they are now a governmental, non-elected governmental agency, essentially.
How do we hold these companies accountable? I mean, the reality is if they're slowly supplanting many aspects of society and they're slowly supplanting many public infrastructure, institutions, whatever they may be in your local jurisdiction, find out. How do we hold them accountable? Because people, my observation is that for better or for worse, people tend to financially support these institutions, either directly or indirectly. And I agree with your perspective, but it clashes with the apparent consumer preferences. So how do these companies get stopped, or how, if not stopped, redirected to something more healthy?
I have whenever people ask about how do you implement change, how do you like change something that is a flaw in society, I always say it's through policy of electing government officials, electing officials to hold office in the representative democracy, and then also changing public opinion. So elections, luckily we live in Washington State. It's super easy to vote by mail, even though someone out in Eastern Washington wants to get rid of voting by mail, which is wild. But voting by mail, voting in general is the easiest way to vote for people that align with your morals, align with the direction that you want the country to go to, and they could eventually implement laws, policy, or even taxes against tech companies, kind of like the tax. I'm blanking on it, but one of the taxes that City of Seattle implemented against
the payroll tax.
The payroll tax,
for, I believe, off the top of my head, it was for private institutions larger than 100 employees. There was a per capita payroll tax passed by the City of Seattle and a couple of other levies attempting to target large organizations. And then over the last little while, many of those large organizations have moved their payroll out of the Seattle metropolitan area.
Whack-a-mole.
Yeah, like whack-a-mole, exactly. And that's why, one of the reasons why reasonable people will differ, but I disagree with when it comes to holding the largest, most wealthy individuals accountable. It's functionally impossible to do it at the local and state level, because these kleptocrats have enough resources that they say, oh, you tax me here? Jeff Bezos suddenly spends a lot of time in Florida where they don't have all the taxes they levied on him after the Washington State legislature passed a bunch of capital gains and inheritance taxes. In response, Jeff Bezos just moved to Florida where none of those taxes existed. And I'm wondering, like, in an era where institutions generally are viewed with extreme skepticism, just justified and unjustified, how can those institutions ever hold the richest people accountable if nobody trusts them, the FTC to do its job, whether or not that perception is correct? It's the media sphere that surrounds us.
I've been looking at my crystal ball to figure out the answer to that question of how do you hold institutions accountable when currently right now we have a virus in most of our federal institutions. I would go even further to say, like, we have viruses in our Washington State institution and also the city of Seattle that makes it very hard for meaningful change to happen. Power begets power. It holds on to itself and it does not want to let go. So being able to change those institutions, again, public opinion of, for example, the protests happening last night, which were started from the protests that were happening in LA about ICE.
Yep.
And the Trump administration's handling of trying to detain undocumented immigrants. So it is this very, I don't know, it's like a catch-22 of how do you hold an institution accountable through, I guess, voting, where sometimes when a politician gets into the institution of government, they completely change, bought out by special interests. And then you have public policy, public opinion, which is a very back and forth pendulum, I think, again, to the protests last night, where some people may view that as like, yes, thank you for standing up for undocumented immigrants. You know, we have to limit ICE activity, et cetera, et cetera. But then the other side seeing it as just like, oh my God, the city is burning. Donald Trump, please come in and save us.
The same thing happened with the Chaz, the Chop.
The Chop Chaz.
The Chop Chaz. I don't know why we rebranded mid-protest, but we did. Where there was an autonomous zone around Cal Anderson Park and a couple blocks beyond back in the 2020 era of the George Floyd summer. And I live not far from here when that happened, and I walked around and it seemed most of the time like a pretty normal place, but for the fact that SPD for a limited time had no jurisdiction for a couple of square blocks. They abandoned the northern precinct and the place.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I went and walked around, and sure, it was pretty chaotic, but it wasn't like dangerous. And it was only a tiny, tiny fraction of the city. And then all my relatives out in North Dakota, et cetera, and all of my friends' relatives, basically people who weren't there, thought that Seattle had fallen. And there was nothing left, and everyone was dying in the streets.
And the same exact thing is happening to LA now.
At the exact same,
where it's like it's a flattening of cities, just because at this point, the city's populations are dominated by a certain subsect of the population, those who have money, especially Seattle and San Francisco and New York. And those are the perceptions that are getting out to the masses. So you'll have an incident like the Chop Chaz happening, which was literally just at Cal Anderson, right down the street here, of just a few, I wouldn't even call it blocks, but people extrapolating that and saying, oh my God, the entire city of Seattle is on fire, which also goes back to this perception of Seattle where maybe some people in the city that live here would also think, oh my God, my entire city is on fire, when you don't understand that the city of Seattle is a massive city. It stretches. It is not just the downtown core. So all of this is just leading to this identity crisis of Seattle right now.
The same thing, and I think I want to take this moment to talk about not media complicity, because I actually have a lot of sympathy for the spot that journalists are generally in now. We can get to that in a second, but like in LA, Mayor Bass declared a curfew. The curfew was only for like 5 square blocks, and it was after 8 p.m. and it did not apply to residents and businesses in the area. Like it was an extremely limited scope curfew. But what made the headlines with every major news publication is that like curfew declared in LA, right? Like, which implies it's for everyone, regardless of residential status, across the whole city. National Guards are in the streets. And it's true, National Guard were deployed, but they were deployed to a single intersection for about at least at time of this recording, for about 6 hours, right? Which I looked at a map of LA with a single dot, and it was like the places the National Guard have been deployed.
Very tiny.
Yeah, not just tiny, minuscule. And that's also not what made the news. What made the news was National Guard deployed to LA, which also implies that the whole city is under invasion from the federal government.
Not even understanding that Los Angeles is a city and county.
Yes, yes, with a larger LA County alone is a larger population than the entire state of Washington.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think this idea of media perception, this visualization, I think that perception is what Trump feeds on. I've talked a lot about how Trump he is the ultimate attention economist. Right. I don't agree with many of his takes, policies, or in my opinion, delusions, but I admit that he is charismatic in the way that draws people to him, right?
And he's really funny too.
And he's really funny.
unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the real unfortunate part. He has a compelling delivery, if not message, right? And his strategists, I argue accidentally, but ultimately they discovered that attention equals good, right? Meanwhile, the Democrats, generally speaking, were terrified of the perception of a bad interview,
Mhm.
while Trump and his team will just barrel through every single terrible interaction they can find. And then all the pundits say Trump looks like idiot, but they say Trump, and that's his victory, right?
Yeah.
Like when Kristi Noem a couple of weeks ago got in front of the Senate, a Senate subcommittee, and said habeas corpus means the president can deport whoever he wants, and everyone was like, "Oh, that idiot! She's so stupid." And I'm like, "No, she got you. She knew that's not what it meant, but she said it because the purpose of these Senate hearings is to get the sound bites."
Yes.
How do you think we short circuit? I mean, other than touching grass, because like we're bombarded with this information forever. How do we short circuit that attention cycle that specifically benefit bad actors?
It's exhausting because even right now with the what's happening in LA, I struggle to call it riots just because
Yeah.
it's protests.
Protests, yeah.
What's the protests that are happening in LA right now? It is dominating the feed, and when you're looking at media articles, it's all, oh, Trump said this, Trump said this, Trump said that, and it's just like a constant barrage of just shit.
Yeah.
Of that Trump that is doing, of the things that Trump is doing, and there's no forest. People aren't there, they're looking at the trees, but they're not looking at the forest, which is the broader schema, broader undercurrent of what's happening. So people need to be able to be on the ground and see, all right, because some of those things that the Trump administration is doing is relevant, but I would say like 90% of what they're doing is just like, or what they're putting out into the media is just like, you can ignore that just because
Yep.
you got to pay attention to the higher level stuff.
Yep. That's exactly why. So we're a legal podcast, as everyone here knows. But I have avoided, and we talk about Trump on the periphery, but I have avoided becoming the Trump coverage guy as much as I can while still being responsive to the zeitgeist, because I'm of the opinion that like awareness is not control.
Yeah.
Right. Awareness is also not influence. Right. And so people in this information economy, they are like, well, if I just read everything about what bad things are happening, well, somehow that will slow it down, which it won't. Usually what it does is it exhausts like our human capacity. Humans can only absorb so much, like we have limited bandwidth. They can only absorb and parse and intelligently deal with so much information. And yet we are reaching to absorb so much that it burns out our capacity. Like, for example, the what's dangerous about Trump is normalization. A couple of years ago, in his prior administration, he issued what was called and termed the Muslim ban, banning basically all travelers from a number of Muslim majority countries, and then and North Korea to give him a little cover, a little fig leaf, saying, "Oh, it's not all just Muslim people." That initial one was met with huge protests. People, including myself, showed up at Seattle Tacoma International Airport to help people through what immigration situations we could in the field. That initial ban was struck down by the courts, and then a second, more tailored ban came out, and then there was still uproar, but not as much. And then that one got struck down too, and then the third one made it all the way up to SCOTUS, and that one stood. The contrast between that situation back in 2017, 2018, whatever, and now when another Muslim ban 4.0 just hit the president's desk the other week, crickets, right? Normally, we are the frog. It was the exact same move, and it barely made the news cycle, if at all, because most people were so busy talking about the National Guard and how Newsom owned the Republicans on Twitter, right?
So exhausting.
yeah, I know, exactly. And I think the linear path of like, oh, let's drink liberal tears from many of the Republican base that's at least in power. Let's drink liberal tears. Oh, like now that we're in power, it's time to crack some skulls. How do people maintain optimism for a better future in the face of all those factors?
That's a tough one because Trump is pushing the Overton window, which is just like the what is acceptable to people at a given time, where he's just like playing a little game of, okay, can I do this overreach? Can I overrule states' rights? Can I do all of these things? Testing the limits of his power, and then also pushing people further and further to the point where like you just said, some like a ban of people from specific countries, which we all know is just like a scam. Not a scam. It's just like, what are you doing? This is so awkward, so weird. All of that is part of the overarching plan of just normalization of his behavior, and we should not normalize his behavior because it is not within the scope and realm of what should be acceptable in 2025. So I think of people are very fatigued. I'm fatigued right now. Literally after the election last year, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I had 2 martinis the day afterwards, and I don't even drink martinis. But I was just a little bit stressed. But as I am looking at the forest and not the trees anymore, I'm starting to see things clearer, where if you are paying attention to the path that the Trump administration is taking, they are on a course for a recipe for disaster, just because they're trying to follow this playbook of like strongmen like Putin, Orban, where they slowly started to lay the foundation and framework for corruption and overtaking the government. Donald Trump is doing it out the gate. We are only 6 months into his administration, and that is where the flaw is. We are still a nation that has institutions. We have checks and balances. We have a media that is controlled a little bit, but still people are literally able to film something on their TikTok and go live and have other people see it. So the hope, and also what people should be doing right now, is just paying attention to things in the long term and not the short term. Because as we go forward with, especially, I'm thinking about Saturday with his birthday celebration / the military parade, the optics of that against protests happening in the city, in cities across the US because of the Trump administration, is not going to look good.
It's not going to look, and that's what, and I agree that like tanks rolling into Maryland and DC to like put on $145 million parade that lasts 3 hours. I think it's not going to look good, or I should say, I worry it's not going to look good to people like me or to you, right? But to everyone else that supports an administration like this, it's going to look amazing, because it's like, oh hell yeah, we're Emperor Palpatine style, we're seizing control and order back from the lawless rebels, and now we have a display of strength in the capital city. Showing everyone that America's back, baby, right? And I am so often driven to that divide of perception. Again, we keep bringing up perception, that divide of perception, how Trump creates the impression of bold action and then immediately chickens out right afterwards. Sometimes deliberately, like he declares 11 billion tariffs on China, and then the next day says, well, those tariffs were too high, we're going back to 10% or whatever he's done. There's been, if the last time I checked, there's been about 64 tariff changes announced since the start of in 6 months, about 10 a month. And the markets have been incredibly volatile because of that, because everyone's constantly trying to price in the future returns of a federal government that will tariff anyone into the ground. And I think that perception of bold action is, and correspondingly the Democrats' perception of weakness, is, I think, one of the things that is feeding the Trump's base so wildly. Are you familiar with the gentleman who was elected for a Senate chair seat over AOC a couple months ago, and he had esophageal cancer?
Familiar with the story, not with the details.
Yes, the details are that guy died.
Oh.
And it was the government accountability. Exactly. It was the government accountability. It was like an oversight committee, a very important and powerful one within the Democratic Party. And for Trump's term specifically, very relevant right now. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Schumer, Chuck Schumer, and Leader Jeffries, the party appointed this gentleman who was just at the time diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He was like, I think, 75. And then that gentleman spent the next 6-7 months in a health decline, absent from his seat most of the time. And then last month he died.
Wow.
And what the outrage here is not just that he's old and unable to do his job at a time of public service when it's vital. It's that the party passed over a young leader like AOC to do that, because she wanted the seat too. And she's in her early 30s, mid 30s, and she's got huge popular support. And the party does not seem to be receptive that this is a time of crisis and seems more interested in sticking to decorum. Do you think that's the right tact?
The Democratic Party has a messaging problem right now. They are seen as this party of coastal elites of the liberal leftist cities.
Yes.
And that does not vibe well with, say, people who live in middle America or like Arizona or like Florida or something.
Yeah.
Just because they are not talking to people like normal people. Going back to Donald Trump and what his appeal is to people is that he is a character. He puts on the fucking performance of his life when he is up on that stage spewing his hateful rhetoric, and his people eat that shit up every single time. Meanwhile, the Democrats talk in language that's handed down from academia and muddled into the popular zeitgeist and just all confused, where people don't know about these terms that people are using in like Seattle. That's very commonplace, but someone in like Peoria, Illinois might be like, huh, what are you talking about?
Not to be a fucking guy about this, but the two quintessential examples of that muddling are like Latinx.
Yes.
Like, it would be in Spanish, it would be Latinx, which doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yes.
It's like a perfect phrase coined by white academics / elites, not to buy into that narrative, and then imposed upon. It almost feels like imposed on everyone else, even if it was originally intended as a really inclusive gesture.
Yes.
And like, I actually have a lot of sympathy for a lot of the plight of many rural voters. So, for example, a lot of my extended family are dairy farmers in Wisconsin and across the Midwest. There are towns that were full of life when my father was young in the 60s that now look like a war zone. They've been literally abandoned. There's no resources. All the children leave as soon as they can, and the people left behind slowly die of old age. And it's been like that for like 40 or 50 years. Since 2020, since George Floyd's death specifically, police killings of U.S. citizens overall have increased 18% since 2020. But what the belies in that figure, though, I looked more into it after I talked about it last week, is that they have declined in liberal controlled areas on average of 15%. But they have increased in red states and red controlled dominated areas by 23%. In that time, there have been demographic, economic, political signs of horrible, genuine suffering that in many ways I really empathize with. How can we serve those people if their suffering often isn't even known by many people who live in blue controlled areas?
I think we have to pop our media bubbles that we're all in, our TikTok content bubbles, to understand the plight of the dairy farmer in Wisconsin or the agricultural farmer out there in Yakima and what they're going through. I think back to the messaging from Kamala Harris leading up to the campaign or leading up to the election, which was very, if you notice, focused on the middle class. It was just like, how can we bring the middle class up? And there was no talk about people who are living in poverty or people who are, I don't know if there's a term for this, of just like within the context of the middle class, but they are still like the working poor, like someone who, is working, making like 70, 80 grand a year, which may sound like a lot, but in Seattle or San Francisco or New York, it's just like
you're hanging on by your
fingertips. I think about one of my best friends from college. She works at an Apple store. And one of the things that she hates so much is the inconsistent scheduling. So small things like that, where the Democratic Party could be like, hey, we're going to take a look at making sure that your schedule has to be out 2 months in advance. Or things like even offering just like universal basic income, flouting that. Just because obviously it is a tough political fight to get UBI implemented.
Tell the audience what UBI is.
UBI is a universal basic income, basically guaranteeing a set amount of money that a person will receive, no strings attached, and it's usually tied to the cost of living to an area. So if people were to have a universal basic income, they could take a lot of worry off of their shoulders of like, oh, how am I going to get food? How am I supposed to pay rent? So it's things like that that will materially impact people's lives that the Democratic Party did not talk about, Kamala Harris did not talk about. Instead, it was just like, oh, we're going to give you a child tax credit, which most people don't even understand how that would be implemented.
What does that mean? Yeah, exactly.
You have to give people something that they can feel of, just like, give them money, give them healthcare, give them set schedules, something. Looking at, and this is the problem, it's because they are not talking to regular people. They are just going to think tanks. They are talking to
Georgetown consultants.
Yeah, they're talking to academics. And then you have people like AOC and Bernie Sanders, and then also David Hoggs, who these are all, well, I'll stick with AOC and David Hoggs because they're the younger end.
Yep.
They are brilliant communicators. AOC is one of the best communicators that I've ever seen in my life. She's got the charisma, she's got the knowledge, she's got the grit, the pushback to be able to like say, hey, I'm fighting for my constituents. And yet, like you just said, they did not want her in a leadership position. You have all these, not to be ageist or anything, you've got all these 70 and 80-year-olds within Congress and then also within other sectors of the government controlling, making policy, et cetera, and they may be on cognitive decline. As we've seen, some of these Congress people have dementia.
Yeah, literally.
Actively.
It wasn't, who was, not Christine Waters, but there was literally, I remember there was literally a Senate Democrat member who could not show up at her own hearings. Her staff didn't know where she was half the time. And actually, it's funny you bring up David Hogg, because I don't know if you've heard, but just today or yesterday, he announced he's not running for DNC vice chair again.
Yeah, I saw that.
For those of you that don't know, he has been basically fighting party politics for the last like 3 months because there was a disputed procedural I'll spare you the details, but they were squabbling over who won a DNC chair election at the national level. The DNC vice chair is largely ceremonial, but David Hogg and his messaging have been weighed down by the party basically fighting over whose seat it is to sit in a chair that doesn't hold any power. And so Hogg said, I'm stepping away from the DNC. I'm not seeking re-election to resolve this. We have better things to do. Yeah. Which is just so apropos of the situation going on right now, because it's like the 20 years ago, the average mean first-time home buyer was about 36 years of age nationally. 20 years later, 56 years of age, which means it's the same people, almost beat from, I think maybe there was like one extra year to 57. But it was literally the same people buying homes then are the same ones buying it now. The relationship is linear, and that shows no sign of stopping. I can't afford a house here, which is crazy to say, especially since I work at a law firm. Many of my staff cannot either. They all have college degrees. And as a business owner, and someone in leadership here at Hemmat Law, I so often despair that I can't myself, I don't have the financial resources to overcome how rapidly the numbers are still going up. Yeah. Now, what the critique I would offer of everyone saying, universal basic income, single, one healthcare system, centralized national healthcare system, et cetera, is that I worry that like giving the federal government control over our healthcare creates a football that any other populist, not just now, but any time in the future, could come back and now control. So same with UBI. Is like if I was getting, make up a number, $5,000 a month in UBI, right? A crazy high number, or $3,000 a month, or $2,000, or any number, and then suddenly a populist comes along saying, I will give everyone $10,000 a month and also kick all the whatever X undesirables off of the program, that now centralizes that control in a way that, for better or worse, the federal government does not have right now. What do you say to that potential political concern for the centralizing of authority over our lives?
The centralizing authority over our lives is something that we are currently living under very, very heavy. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I don't know what to do about that, of just like anything can be used by a populist president or political leader. Just because look at Donald Trump right now taking statute from like very, very old ass laws and taking out a very specific line and then using that to wreak havoc, where any person could do that. So, the only way to enshrine things to make sure they're not changed is amending the Constitution, which is next to impossible at this point. So I have no answer for that question.
I think that's honest, uh, and I don't have any answer either, and that's why I always ask guests tough questions like that. Cause like, oh fuck, I don't know. I think as we wrap up our time here, what's a final message you'd leave to the audience or final insight that you'd like to share?
The final insight that I will share is that our lives are about to change, some for the better, some for the worse, just because I was reading an article, it's just like, we are doing very well with cancer right now. I was just like defeating cancer, lower rates. It's like, yes, that's great. People are living longer. However, how are we doing that? Through AI. So AI is something that is going to impact everybody at some point.
Yep.
So I would say that get ready to live in a world that will become increasingly fractured. I know that sounds like a doom and gloom, but in those moments, it brings people together. Like since the election happened, you would think that, I would be, given that I was just like so, upset about the election outcome, that I would just be moping and not doing anything. But no, like my life actually has been, I've found more dedication, more want to be in community with my friends. Everything that I'm doing is in the hopes of bringing people together. And that was sparked because of the election and what's happening. So going forward, yeah, it's going to be some tough shit we're about to go through, but the what I'm seeing in my crystal ball right now is just a return to community, and that return to community will help people get through the coming ages that we're going to go through.
Chappin, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
I've super enjoy your insights, and I really hope we can work together again soon.
I hope so as well.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed talking with Chappin as much as I did. I thought his insights are fantastic. It was a very refreshing take from the doom and gloom I usually engage with on this show, and we will engage with again. But nonetheless, I thought it was a story worth sharing. Please go to the show notes wherever you're listening to this. Chappin has all of his relevant links, his Substack there. He's a phenomenal writer. I recommend you check out his work. As for us, please leave us a star rating, follow the show. If you want to hear more about law, politics, and social commentary, this is the place to find it. We will be back very soon. We have some other great guests and personalities we're hoping to line up, and one that is already locked in that we will not spoil the surprise yet for. But we'll be back very soon. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed listening.